"I'm too big for you," she whispered. The ruthless Italian Mafia boss smiled. "Try me." No one ever noticed the woman behind the counter. They noticed the pastries. Every morning before dawn, while Florence still slept beneath a blanket of mist, a small bakery on a quiet cobblestone street filled the air with the irresistible scent of butter, vanilla, roasted almonds, and freshly brewed espresso. Tourists wandered off their maps to find it. Office workers slowed their hurried steps. Even taxi drivers rolled down their windows just to breathe it in. For a few fleeting seconds, everyone smiled. Then they stepped inside, and their smiles quietly faded, because the person behind the glass display wasn't who they had imagined. She was a beautiful plus-size black woman with warm brown eyes, flour on her cheeks, an apron that had long surrendered to years of hard work. Her hands created desserts worthy of five-star restaurants. But strangers rarely stayed long enough to discover that. Some glanced at her, forced an awkward smile, and left without ordering. Others whispered just loudly enough for her to hear. "The cakes look amazing. I expected someone else." She had heard every version of the same judgment. Eventually, she stopped pretending the words didn't hurt. Still, every sunrise, she unlocked the bakery with the same quiet hope, because her grandmother had taught her something she refused to forget. People may judge the baker, but love always finds a table eventually. She wanted to believe that, even if no one else did. Then, on a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon, the street outside fell strangely silent. It wasn't because of the weather. It was because 6 black luxury cars rolled slowly into the narrow lane, moving with the kind of confidence that made pedestrians step aside without being asked. Shopkeepers lowered their voices. A waiter hurriedly pulled customers inside his cafe. An elderly florist quietly locked her front door. No sirens, no shouting, just silence. In Florence, everyone knew what that silence meant. The De Luca family had arrived. People didn't speak their name unless they had to. Their influence stretched across luxury hotels, vineyards, shipping companies, fashion houses, and old money that had shaped Italy for generations. To the public, they were respected business leaders. Behind closed doors, they were something far more powerful. The rear door of the lead car opened. Matteo De Luca stepped onto the wet pavement. Perfectly tailored black suit, dark overcoat, polished shoes untouched by the rain. His expression revealed nothing. The bodyguards instinctively moved ahead. "Don De Luca," one of them said quietly, "will inspect the area first." Matteo didn't answer. Instead, he stopped walking. His eyes closed. The bodyguards exchanged confused glances. He wasn't looking for danger. He was breathing. Butter, fresh lemon zest, warm vanilla, caramelized sugar. The scent wrapped around him like a forgotten memory. For the first time in years, the feared Italian Mafia boss smiled. Without saying a word, he walked past his own security detail and crossed the street alone. His men froze. "Sir." No response. "The bakery hasn't been cleared." Still nothing. As if drawn by something stronger than reason itself, Matteo pushed open the little wooden door. The brass bell chimed softly. Behind the counter, Aaliyah looked up from icing a lemon ricotta cake. Their eyes met. She glanced at his expensive suit, then at the line of black cars outside, and gave a nervous laugh. "I think you're in the wrong bakery." Matteo looked at the cake, then back at her. His voice was calm, almost impossibly gentle. "No. I've been trying to find this place for 23 years. And in that single sentence, the lives of a forgotten baker and Italy's most feared man became forever intertwined. Act 1. The woman who hid behind her apron, long before Italy's most feared man crossed the threshold of her little bakery, long before whispered rumors and luxury convoys found their way to a forgotten street in Florence. There was simply Aaliyah Brooks. To most people, she was just the baker. To the few who truly knew her, she was the kind of person who remembered everyone's favorite pastry, slipped an extra cookie into a child's paper bag, and stayed up until 3 a.m. to make a birthday cake for someone who couldn't afford one. Her bakery wasn't famous. It wasn't trendy. It wasn't featured in travel magazines or food blogs. It was a tiny corner shop called Nonna Rosa Bakery. tucked between an old flower shop and a family-owned bookstore on one of Florence's oldest streets. The building had belonged to her grandmother, Rosa Brooks, an African-American woman who had fallen in love with Italy decades earlier after visiting as a culinary student. She never returned home permanently. Instead, she built a life in Florence, one loaf of bread at a time. Growing up, Aaliyah spent every summer beside her grandmother, learning recipes that had been passed through generations. Rosa always believed that baking wasn't just about food. It was about making people feel seen. When someone tastes your cake, Rosa would often say with a smile, "They're tasting the kindness you mixed into it." Those words stayed with Aaliyah long after her grandmother passed away. When Rosa left the bakery to her, many people expected her to sell it. They said it was too much responsibility, too expensive to maintain, too small to compete with modern cafes. But Aaliyah refused. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was the last place where she still felt close to the woman who had taught her that love could be measured in teaspoons of vanilla and patient hands. Every morning began the same way. At 4 o'clock, while the city still slept, she tied her curly hair beneath a scarf, tied on her flour-covered apron, turned on the old ovens, and filled the quiet bakery with warmth. By 6, the scent of fresh croissants, lemon ricotta cake, cinnamon rolls, and espresso floated through the neighborhood. People followed the aroma like it was calling them home. But once they stepped inside, reality interrupted expectation. Some customers looked surprised. Others looked disappointed. A few didn't even try to hide it. "I thought the baker would be Italian. She's bigger than I expected. I'll just grab coffee somewhere else." Those comments no longer made Aaliyah cry, not because they didn't hurt, because she'd become too familiar with them. She had spent most of her life believing she had to apologize for taking up space. As a teenager, she skipped birthday parties because classmates laughed at her size. She avoided school dances because no one ever asked her. Even as an adult, blind dates rarely lasted beyond the first cup of coffee. The rejection wasn't always cruel. Sometimes it came disguised as kindness. "You're beautiful, just not my type." Eventually, she stopped looking for love altogether. Instead, she poured every ounce of affection she had into her bakery. The regular customers adored her. An elderly widower named Carlo came every morning for almond biscotti and stayed just long enough to tell stories about his late wife. A group of university students claimed her chocolate-filled cornetti were better than anything sold in the city center. Children from a neighborhood called her Miss Aaliyah and pressed their noses against the display window every Friday, knowing she'd always save them the warmest cookies. Those moments reminded her that she mattered, even if the world rarely looked beyond her appearance. Still, when evening arrived and the bakery emptied, silence settled over the shop like a heavy blanket. She would wipe down the counters, count the day's modest earnings, and quietly stack the pastries that hadn't sold. Nothing was wasted. Every unsold loaf, tart, and slice of cake went to a nearby homeless shelter before closing. Her grandmother had one unbreakable rule: if someone is hungry, they've already paid enough. Aaliyah honored that promise every single day. She never imagined that, only a few streets away, one of the wealthiest and most feared men in Italy was doing something he had never done before. Instead of returning to his mansion after buying a single slice of cake, Matteo De Luca sat alone in the backseat of his car, staring at the unopened bakery box resting on his lap, as though it contained far more than dessert. Act 2. The man who never forgot a taste. Matteo De Luca had spent half his life convincing the world he had forgotten how to feel. In Italy, his name carried the weight of generations. Some knew him as the billionaire owner of luxury hotels overlooking Lake Como. Others knew him as the man whose vineyards produced award-winning wines served in royal palaces and Michelin-star restaurants. The newspapers called him an elusive businessman. His enemies called him untouchable. Those closest to him simply called him Don Matteo. Power had become second nature. He could buy companies before breakfast, influence elections without appearing on television, make a single phone call that changed someone's future forever. Yet none of those things brought him peace. Every evening, after the meetings ended and the bodyguard stepped outside his office, silence became his only companion. His mansion overlooked the rolling hills outside Florence. It contained priceless paintings, antique furniture, and a wine cellar older than some countries. But despite its beauty, it never felt like home. Home had disappeared 23 years earlier. He remembered it with startling clarity. A small countryside kitchen, sunlight spilling through lace curtains. A woman laughing as she dusted flour across his nose after catching him stealing warm pastries before they had cooled. His mother, Aaliyah De Luca, she believed every problem could be softened with bread fresh from the oven. When Matteo was 12, she taught him how to fold cake batter by hand. Never rush it, she would say. If you force something delicate, it collapses. Those became the last baking lessons she ever gave him. She passed away only months later after a long illness. The kitchen grew quiet. The oven stayed cold. And Matteo buried every gentle part of himself beneath responsibility. His father expected strength. The family expected leadership. The world expected fear. So fear became the language he spoke best, until he tasted Aaliyah's lemon ricotta cake. Back inside his moving car, he slowly opened the white bakery box. His security team watched from the front seats through the rear-view mirror. They had seen their boss negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking. They had seen him remain calm in situations that made experienced men panic. They had never seen him hesitate before eating dessert. Matteo lifted a small fork. The first bite barely touched his tongue before time seemed to stop. Butter, fresh ricotta, hints of orange blossom, a whisper of vanilla, balanced lemon zest. Not too sweet. Exactly the way his mother had made it. He closed his eyes. For a brief moment, he wasn't the head of the De Luca family. He was simply a little boy sitting at a wooden kitchen table, swinging his legs beneath the chair while waiting for another slice. His driver spoke carefully. "Don Matteo?" No answer. "You have a dinner meeting in 20 minutes. Matteo opened his eyes slowly. "Cancel it." The driver nearly looked back in surprise. "It involves a minister." "I know." The investors flew in from Milan. "They can fly home." The car fell silent. No one questioned him again. That night, instead of reviewing contracts or attending formal dinners, Matteo did something he hadn't done in years. He searched through old family belongings stored in the private library beneath his estate. Boxes covered in dust. Handwritten recipe cards. Family photographs. Letters tied together with faded ribbon. Hours passed. Just as he was about to give up, he found a worn notebook tucked inside one of his mother's baking books. Most of the pages contained recipes. One page contained only a single sentence. "If you ever find a baker whose lemon cake tastes like sunlight, tell her she already knows my heart." Matteo stared at the words for a long time. He whispered quietly, "Who taught you?" The next morning, before sunrise, his chief of security received instructions unlike any he had heard before. No meetings until noon. "Yes, Don. No visitors." "Understood. And we're going back to the bakery." The guard blinked. "The same bakery?" Matteo nodded. "I want breakfast." The guard smiled politely. "We can have the chef prepare." "No." Matteo stood, already reaching for his coat. "I want her breakfast." Less than an hour later, 6 black luxury cars rolled once again to the narrow streets of Florence. This time, the neighborhood wasn't frightened. It was curious. People peeked from cafe windows. Shopkeepers paused in their work. Even the children on their way to school stopped to watch. The convoy came to a gentle stop in front of Nana Rosa Bakery. Inside, Aaliyah was carefully arranging fresh cannoli in the display case when a familiar brass bell above the door rang. She looked up. There he was, the same perfectly tailored black suit, the same calm eyes, the same quiet confidence. She smiled politely, trying to hide her nervousness. "You found your way back." Matteo smiled for only the second time in years. "I told you yesterday." He glanced toward the warm loaves cooling behind the counter. "I've been looking for this place for 23 years. Then, instead of ordering, he asked a question no one had ever asked her before. "Would you have breakfast with me?" And for the first time since inheriting the bakery, Aaliyah didn't know what to say. Act 3. the word she had believed for years. For a moment, Aaliyah wondered if she had misheard him. Breakfast? With a man who arrived in a convoy that could stop traffic without a single horn? She glanced past him. 6 bodyguards stood respectfully outside, pretending not to watch. Across the street, the owner of the flower shop peeked through her window. The barista next door had forgotten to serve a customer. The entire neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. Aaliyah let out a nervous laugh. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." Matteo tilted his head slightly. "I don't believe I have. I'm covered in flour. I notice. I've been awake since for this morning. I imagined you had. My hair is a mess." "It suits you." She couldn't help smiling. He answered every excuse as though it wasn't an excuse at all. Finally, she folded her arms. "And what exactly would people say if they saw me having breakfast with someone like you?" Matteo looked around the bakery. "They'd probably say the coffee is worth trying." She laughed. A real laugh. The kind that escaped before she could stop it. It surprised both of them. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. "I need to take these croissants out of the oven." Matteo nodded. "I'll wait." Instead of sitting at the polished table near the window, he quietly pulled a wooden chair beside the kitchen counter. He watched as she moved effortlessly through the bakery, rolling dough, brushing pastries with butter, checking timers without looking, greeting regular customers by name. She never stopped smiling, even when business was slow, even when someone walked in, looked at her, and walked right back out again. Matteo noticed everything, especially the moment after the customer left. For just a second, her shoulders dropped. Then she straightened them again and greeted the next person with the same warm smile. No one else seemed to notice. He did. By mid-morning, the rush had ended. Aaliyah carried 2 cappuccinos and a plate of warm almond pastries to a small table tucked beside the bakery window. "This is all I can offer," she said. Matteo looked at the table. "I've eaten in restaurants where breakfast costs more than most people earn in a month." He picked up a pastry. "This already looks better." She rolled her eyes. "You're either very kind or very good at compliments. I don't waste either." For a while, they simply ate. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Outside, Florence slowly awakened. Cyclists rode through the narrow streets. Church bells echoed across the rooftops. Tourists stopped to photograph the colorful buildings. Inside the bakery, time seemed slower. "So," Aaliyah finally asked, "what do you actually do?" Matteo smiled into his coffee. "I manage family businesses." That's a very mysterious answer. It's also true. She narrowed her eyes playfully. "Hotels?" "Some." "Restaurants?" "A few." "Wineries?" He nodded. She laughed. "I knew it." "What?" "You have vineyard owner shoes." He looked down at his polished leather shoes. "I didn't know vineyard owners had a dress code." "They do." "And what is it?" "They always look expensive." For the first time in years, Matteo laughed. Not politely, not quietly, genuinely. Even his bodyguards looked toward the bakery in surprise. None of them had heard that sound in almost a decade. Over the next 2 weeks, breakfast became a routine. Every Thursday, 8 o'clock, 1 black convoy, 1 quiet table, 2 cappuccinos, no announcements, no photographs, no interruptions. The neighborhood slowly stopped being afraid. Instead, people became curious. "Who is he?" customers whispered. "A businessman," Aaliyah would answer honestly, because that was all she knew. She never searched his name, never asked personal questions. She treated him exactly like everyone else. And that, more than anything, was why Matteo kept coming back. For the first time in years, someone wanted nothing from him. One rainy Thursday, after they had finished eating, Matteo helped carry empty cups back to counter. As he reached for a tray, their hands brushed. It lasted only a second, but Aaliyah quickly pulled hers away. She stepped back, too quickly. Matteo noticed. "So," he asked softly, "why do you always move away?" She looked down at the flowers scattered across her apron. "You really want to know?" "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." She took a slow breath. Years of carefully hidden insecurity rose to the surface. You walk into a room, and everyone notices you. She forced a smile. I walk into a room, and everyone notices my size. He remained silent. She continued, I've spent my whole life being told I should become smaller. She looked directly into his eyes for the first time that morning. I'm too big for someone like you. The words hung between them. Heavy, painfully honest. She expected sympathy, or awkward silence, maybe even polite disagreement. Instead, Matteo slowly stepped closer, not enough to invade her space, just enough that she no longer felt alone. His voice was calm, gentle, certain. Aaliyah? He waited until she met his eyes again. Then he asked quietly, Who convinced you that love has a dress size? She blinked. No one had ever answered her that way. He didn't tell her to lose weight. He didn't tell her she was perfect. He simply questioned the lies she had believed for years. Tears gathered in her eyes before she realized they were there. She looked away, embarrassed. I don't cry in front of customers. Matteo smiled warmly. Then it's a good thing. He glanced around the empty bakery. I'm here as a friend. For the first time in a very long time, Aaliyah allowed herself to believe that perhaps the harshest voice judging her had never belonged to strangers. It had been her own. And neither of them noticed the elegant woman sitting across the street in a black sedan, quietly watching the bakery through dark sunglasses. She lowered a photograph onto the passenger seat. It showed Matteo standing beside Aaliyah. She picked up her phone. Tell the family, she said calmly. The Don has finally fallen in love. Act 4. When two worlds finally collided. Love has a quiet way of changing routines. Without either of them noticing, Thursday breakfasts became Tuesday coffees. Tuesday coffees became evening walks. Soon, Matteo found reasons to visit the bakery almost every day. Sometimes he claimed he wanted another slice of lemon ricotta cake. Other times he insisted his housekeeper needed fresh sourdough. Aaliyah eventually stopped pretending she believed his excuses. You know, she teased one afternoon, for someone who owns vineyards, you buy an awful lot of bread. Matteo smiled. I've discovered the bread isn't why I come. She shook her head, trying to hide the blush creeping across her face. I notice. Autumn slowly gave way to winter. Florence transformed into something out of an old painting. Golden lights hung above narrow streets. Christmas markets filled the piazzas. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted through the evening air. One evening, after closing the bakery, Matteo invited Aaliyah to a small Christmas market overlooking the Arno River. She hesitated. I don't think I dress for somewhere fancy. He looked at her oversized wool sweater, knitted scarf, and flowers still dusting one sleeve. I wasn't hoping for fancy. He offered his arm. I was hoping for you. She laughed softly before slipping her hand through his arm. For the first time in years, she wasn't wondering who was staring at her. She was simply enjoying the moment. They wandered through rows of handmade ornaments, artisan chocolates, and glowing lanterns. Matteo won her a tiny stuffed bear at one of the carnival games. She laughed so hard when he missed the first 3 throws that even his bodyguard smiled. You planned that, he said. I absolutely did. You wanted to embarrass me. I wanted proof that the mysterious businessman isn't good at everything. I'll admit defeat. She held up the little bear. I'll treasure this forever. He looked at her with an expression that was becoming harder to hide. So will I. But happiness rarely goes unnoticed. Inside the De Luca estate, dinner was served beneath crystal chandeliers and centuries-old paintings. The long dining table could seat 30 people. Only 6 were present. Matteo, his uncle Vittorio, his younger sister, Sophia, 2 family advisors, and his grandmother, Donna Elena De Luca, the true matriarch of the family. Though well into her 80s, Donna Elena's sharp eyes missed nothing. She calmly set down her teacup. You're smiling again. The room became silent. Matteo looked up. I wasn't aware that was a crime. No. She smiled knowingly. It's simply been many years. Vittorio leaned back in his chair. We've all heard the rumors. Matteo said nothing. The woman owns a bakery. Still silence. And she's not from Italy. Silence again. Finally, Vittorio folded his hands. People are beginning to talk. Matteo met his uncle's gaze without hesitation. Let them. The De Luca family has traditions. So do I. You barely know her. I know enough. Vittorio's voice hardened. Our name carries responsibilities. Matteo's remained calm. So does my heart. The room fell completely quiet. Donna Elena watched him carefully. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled. Bring her to dinner. Every head turned toward her. Vittorio looked shocked. Mother, if this woman has reminded my grandson how to smile. She lifted her teacup. Then I'd like to meet the miracle myself. Across town, Aaliyah had no idea that one sentence had just changed everything. She was busy icing a wedding cake when Matteo arrived. He looked unusually thoughtful. She noticed immediately. Something happened. He nodded. My family wants to meet you. The piping bag nearly slipped from her hands. They what? They've invited you to dinner. Aaliyah stared at him. The same family that owns hotels? Yes. The vineyards? Yes. The luxury fashion houses? Those too. She folded her arms. I suddenly don't feel hungry. Matteo laughed. You'll survive. You don't know that. I do. What if they don't like me? They'll like you. What if they don't? He walked around the counter until they stood face to face. Then he gently brushed a streak of flour from her cheek. If they see what I see. He smiled softly. They won't have much choice. She looked down, suddenly nervous. And if they only see my size? For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Matteo gently took both of her hands. They'll see the woman who feeds strangers before feeding herself. The woman who gives away bread every evening. The woman who rebuilt her grandmother's dream with her own hands. The woman who makes Florence smell like hope every morning. His voice grew even quieter. And if someone cannot see beyond your appearance, they're the one who has failed. Not you. Tears shimmered in Aaliyah's eyes. She squeezed his hands. You always know what to say. He smiled. No, I just tell you what you deserve to hear all along. 2 nights later, a black car arrived outside Nana Rosa Bakery. Not 6 cars. Not 12 bodyguards. Just one elegant sedan. Matteo stepped out wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He walked to the bakery door, carrying a small white box. What is this? Aaliyah asked. A gift. She opened it carefully. Inside rested an antique silver rolling pin, beautifully engraved. Along the handle were delicate Italian words. La vera bellezza nutre il cor. True beauty nourishes the heart. She looked up at him, speechless. My mother owned it, he said quietly. She always believed it should belong to someone who baked with love. Aaliyah held the rolling pin as though it were made of glass. You trust me with something this precious? Matteo smiled. I trust you with something even more precious. She looked at him curiously. What? My future. Before she could answer, the church bells across Florence began to ring. Snowflakes drifted gently through the evening air, and together they climbed into the waiting car. Neither of them knew that by the end of the night, the De Luca family would face a choice that would redefine what honor truly meant. Act 5, the dinner that changed a dynasty. The gates of the De Luca estate opened without a sound. As the car rolled slowly along the tree-lined driveway, Aaliyah watched centuries-old olive trees sway beneath the evening breeze. The villa stood atop a gentle hill overlooking the lights of Florence, its golden windows glowing warmly against the winter sky. It was breathtaking and terrifying. I don't belong here, she whispered. Matteo reached across the center console and gently covered her hand with his. I've spent my whole life here. He smiled softly. You've made it feel like home for the first time. She looked at him. You always say things like that. Because they're true. Inside the villa, the atmosphere was far less intimidating than Aaliyah had imagined. There were no raised voices, no displays of power. Only generations of family gathered around a beautifully prepared dinner table. Donna Elena rose first. Despite her age, she walked with quiet dignity toward Aaliyah. For several seconds, she simply looked at her. not with judgment, with curiosity. Then she smiled. So, you're the woman who convinced my impossible grandson to laugh again. The room chuckled softly. Aaliyah smiled nervously. I didn't know he needed convincing. Donna Elena laughed. Oh, child, you have no idea. The tension in the room dissolved almost instantly. Dinner became something Aaliyah never expected. They spoke about baking, about Florence, about travel, about Matteo's mother, Lucia. Donna Elena asked endless questions about Nana Rosa Bakery. What inspires your recipes? My grandmother. Why do you give away unsold bread every night? Because hunger doesn't disappear when shops close. The elderly woman nodded with quiet approval. Good answer. Across the table, Matteo couldn't stop watching Aaliyah. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She simply spoke with honesty, and somehow that honesty transformed the room. Even Vittorio, who had entered the evening prepared to dislike her, found himself listening more than speaking. After dessert, Donna Elena surprised everyone. She stood. There is something I'd like to see. The family followed her outside to the villa's private garden. Near the center stood an ancient lemon tree. It had been planted by Matteo's great-grandparents nearly a century earlier. Donna Elena gently touched one of its branches. Lucia loved this tree. She turned toward Aaliyah. Every birthday, she baked one lemon ricotta cake using its fruit. Aaliyah smiled. So do I. I know. Donna Elena reached into her pocket and unfolded a faded recipe card. Its edges were worn with age. I compared your cake to Lucia's. She looked directly into Aaliyah's eyes. They're almost identical. Aaliyah's eyes widened. I've never seen her recipe. I know. Donna Elena smiled. Some recipes are measured by ingredients. She placed the card into Aaliyah's hands. The important ones are measured by love. Tears filled Aaliyah's eyes. She realized she wasn't being tested. She was being welcomed. Later that evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Vittorio quietly walked over to Matteo. I owe you an apology. Matteo looked surprised. For what? I judged her before I knew her. Matteo smiled knowingly. So did everyone else. Vittorio nodded. I won't make that mistake again. Across the room, Aaliyah laughed at one of Sophia's stories. The sound filled the villa. Donna Elena watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. She leaned toward Matteo. You chose well. He smiled. I know. No. She gently squeezed his shoulder. You chose with your heart. As the evening drew to a close, Matteo walked Aaliyah onto the terrace overlooking Florence. The city shimmered beneath a sky filled with stars. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence felt complete. Finally, Aaliyah broke it. You know. I almost told you no. I know. I thought someone like you could never love someone like me. Matteo turned toward her. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket, not for a ring, for a small folded photograph. It showed his mother standing beside a kitchen counter, covered in flour, laughing with joy. She used to tell me something. He handed Aaliyah the picture. The right person will never ask you to become less. He looked into her eyes. They'll remind you that you've always been enough. A tear slipped down Aaliyah's cheek. This time, she didn't wipe it away. She simply smiled. I think, she whispered, I'm finally starting to believe that. Matteo gently took her hand. You don't have to believe it alone anymore. Above them, the bells of Florence rang softly through the winter night. For the first time in years, neither of them felt lonely. They felt exactly where they were meant to be. Act 6. Love was never measured in size. Spring arrived gently in Florence. The gray skies of winter gave way to golden mornings, and the narrow streets burst into color as flower boxes overflowed from every balcony. Tourists filled the piazzas again, cameras in hand, searching for the city's famous landmarks. But there was one place that had quietly become a destination of its own, Nana Rosa Bakery. Not because it had suddenly become luxurious. The old wooden floors still creaked. The display case was still slightly crooked. The faded sign above the door still carried the marks of time. But every morning, a line formed before sunrise. People came for the lemon ricotta cake. They stayed because of the woman who served it with a smile that made everyone feel like family. Word had spread throughout Italy, not about the De Luca family, not about wealth, not about influence. People spoke about kindness, about the baker who donated bread every evening, about the woman who remembered every child's favorite pastry, about the place where no one was treated like a stranger. For the first time in years, the bakery sold out before noon. Life changed in quiet ways. Lily became the bakery's full-time manager. The homeless shelter never missed a delivery of fresh bread. A group of young culinary students began apprenticing under Aaliyah, eager to learn not only her recipes but the compassion behind them. Whenever one of them became frustrated, she smiled and repeated the words her grandmother had taught her. People may forget what you baked, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. The students wrote those words above the kitchen door. Matteo changed too. He still led the De Luca family with calm authority. He still attended meetings, managed businesses, and carried responsibilities few people could imagine. But every afternoon, no matter how busy his schedule became, there was one appointment he never canceled: coffee at Nana Rosa Bakery. Sometimes he washed dishes after closing. Sometimes he swept the floor while pretending he didn't know how. The neighborhood children laughed every time they caught one of Italy's most powerful men wearing an apron 2 sizes too small. Even Matteo laughed with them. Power had earned him respect. Love had finally given him joy. One warm evening, the entire neighborhood gathered in the small square outside the bakery. Strings of golden lights hung between the old buildings. Long wooden tables overflowed with fresh bread, pastries, pasta, fruit, and flowers. There was no red carpet, no luxury ballroom, no television cameras. Only friends, neighbors, customers who had become family. Donna Elena stood and gently tapped her glass. The conversations faded. She looked first at Aaliyah, then at Matteo. I have lived long enough to learn one important truth. She smiled warmly. The world spends far too much time measuring people. She paused. By appearance, by money, by status. She reached for Aaliyah's hand. But the people who truly change our lives are measured only by the love they leave behind. The square erupted into applause. Aaliyah looked around, tears shining in her eyes. There were children she had watched grow up. The elderly widower who still came every morning for biscotti, the university students, the shelter volunteers, the De Luca family. Everyone was smiling at her, not because she had become someone different, because she had finally allowed herself to believe she was enough. As the celebration drew to a close, Matteo led Aaliyah back inside the bakery. The lights were low. The familiar scent of vanilla filled the room. He walked to the old wooden counter where they had first met months before. The same brass bell still hung above the door. The same oven hummed quietly in the background. He reached into his pocket and smiled. This time, it was a ring. Simple, elegant, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the warm kitchen light. He lowered himself onto one knee. Aaliyah Brooks, you once told me you were too big for someone like me. He shook his head with a gentle smile. You were wrong. You were simply too extraordinary for anyone who couldn't see your heart. He took a slow breath. You taught me that strength can be gentle, that kindness can change generations, and that home isn't a place. It's a person. He looked up into her tear-filled eyes. Will you spend the rest of your life reminding me what truly matters? For a heartbeat, the bakery became completely still. Then Aaliyah laughed through her tears, the same warm laugh that had first broken into Matteo's carefully built walls. She nodded. Yes. With all my heart, yes. Outside, the church bells of Florence began to ring across the city, as if celebrating with them. Neighbors rushed toward the bakery after hearing the cheers. The little shop that had once been overlooked became filled with hugs, laughter, and the sweet aroma of fresh bread. Years later, visitors would often ask why Nana Rosa Bakery always felt different from every other bakery in Italy. The answer was never written on the menu. It lived in every loaf, every slice of cake, every warm welcome at the door, and the two people who prove that the greatest love stories are never baked from perfection. They are baked from acceptance, patience, and the courage to believe that a heart is far more beautiful than a mirror could ever reveal.